My father didn't even clear his throat before doing it. He simply slid a polished folder across the table and said my sister's name like it was some kind of promise. Lena had been home for 7 days. I had carried my parents for 10 long years. My mother's nod was the loudest sound in the room. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I placed the power of attorney beside the house keys, the metal clinking sharp enough to slice through the silence. Everyone assumed I was surrendering, but when Lena opened the letter I left for her, she didn't read it twice. She couldn't. I grew up in hallways that smelled of antiseptic and lavender, lights humming gently overhead. My father walked ahead of me with long, confident strides, greeting every resident by name. I used to trail behind him, pushing a wheelchair too big for me, standing on my toes just to keep it from veering. The metal rattled, and he'd glance back with a smile that never fully reached me. "Careful, Kara," he'd say, then turn right back to the person he wanted to impress. Lena never trailed behind anyone. She glided, dresses swaying, curls catching the light, laughter pulling people's eyes toward her like gravity. My mother posed her in doorways and beside holiday decorations, posting photos with captions about our bright future. I sometimes appeared in the background, half cut off, holding a clipboard or wiping a spill no one noticed except me. Even as children, the divide felt choreographed. Lena got the dance shoes, the summer camps, the weekends spent unlocking her potential. I got responsibility. Kara's independent. My parents told everyone about my independence as if it were something I was born with, not something they'd shaped me into. When Lena complained about her homework, they hired a tutor. When I brought home straight A's, my father nodded without lifting his eyes from his laptop. "Expected from you." There's one birthday I remember vividly. Lena's cake had sparklers, gold balloons, and a dozen relatives gathered around her. Mine, 2 months later, was a grocery store sheep cake left on the kitchen counter, half frosted, already leaning. My mother kissed my cheek and reminded me to grab my work uniform before heading to the facility for an evening shift. I was 16. The shift wasn't required. The mortgage was. I didn't resent Lena then. She wasn't the one who set the rules. She simply flourished under them. But I learned early that wanting anything made me inconvenient, so I stopped wanting. I filled medication drawers, folded towels, helped residents write holiday cards. I became the girl who solved problems quietly, whose usefulness erased any need for praise. By adulthood, the pattern was cemented. Lena left for the city to build a career in creative media, a dream my parents spoke of with reverence. When she called home, it was usually to ask for money. They always sent it. Meanwhile, my father got sick, then my mother. The business started to crumble, staff leaving, regulations tightening, and the daughter they turned to wasn't the one they'd invested in, it was me. I signed the power of attorney while sitting on a vinyl hospital chair at 2 in the morning, my mother nodding as if this had always been my destiny. "You're good with the serious things," she whispered. It wasn't a compliment, it was confirmation of a role I never asked for. Some nights after long shifts, I'd catch my reflection in the facility's glass doors, straight posture, hair tightly pulled back, tablet in hand. I didn't look like someone in her 20s, I looked like someone who had already lived a full life. Even then, I knew this wasn't a position I chose, it was one assigned. That was the day I understood my family's belief. Lena was the face, I was the scaffolding. The shift can quietly, like a storm creeping in before anyone realizes the sky has changed. At first, it was small things. An email chain about state inspections that normally included me arrived without my name, then another about a staffing audit, then a meeting at the office, succession planning, that I only learned about because a nurse wondered why I wasn't presenting the operational report.
I remember standing in the supply room, air cold from the refrigeration unit, holding a box of wound dressings. My phone buzzed, a photo from my mother. Lena standing in front of the facility sign, smiling, her hair lifted by the wind. The caption, "Future Leadership." I stared at the image until the screen dimmed. Then another message appeared, an invitation graphic, gold lettering announcing a family legacy celebration, complete with a date and location. No mention of my role, no conversation, just a card slipped into my mailbox like a formality. That evening, I walked into my parents' kitchen. The air smelled of roasted peppers. My father stood at the counter, speaking quietly to Lena about vision ideas for the next decade. My mother leaned against the island, nodding along. I waited for them to acknowledge me. They didn't. When my father finally noticed I was there, he offered a distracted smile. "Kara, don't worry about the administrative stuff right now. You've done enough heavy lifting. It's time for Lena to take on bigger responsibilities." The word bigger echoed in my head. Lena stood with her arms crossed, a polite smile on her lips, as if preparing for a stage entrance rather than a real job. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My fingers tightened around the edge of my tablet. My mother reached over and touched my wrist lightly. "You're good with the behind-the-scenes things," she said. "Let her shine." Behind the scenes. Those words hit harder than anything else. Later that night, I found another folder on the dining table. Inside were financial projections written in Lena's handwriting. Incorrect numbers, impossible proposals. Yet my parents had signed their initials in the corner. They had already made their choice. I sat down, the chair legs scraping softly across the floor. My breathing steadied, thin but controlled. I looked at the papers again and felt something inside me settle, not shatter. I smiled. I didn't react, I didn't argue, I didn't correct the numbers or remind them who had kept the system running for a decade. I simply closed the folder, placed it exactly where I found it, and walked upstairs. Each step felt steady, almost weightless, as if I were leaving gravity behind. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed. The walls were still the same pale blue from my childhood, faded, familiar, indifferent. My tablet rested beside me, its dim screen casting a soft glow across my hands. The house was quiet, except for Lena's laughter drifting up the staircase, light, airy, already carrying the confidence of someone stepping into a role she hadn't earned. I opened a blank document, no headings, no emotion, just space. Then I began. The first entry was a timeline, 10 years compressed into bullet points. Medical emergencies, regulatory freezes, staffing shortages, the year we nearly lost Medicaid support. Every crisis I stepped into because no one else knew how. The second entry covered structural licenses, compliance standards, vendor contracts, hospital partnerships. I listed every person who relied on the system, not the property, to function, the inspectors who trusted my reports, the physicians who approved our care protocols, the caseworkers who called me, not my parents, when families panicked. I didn't need to build a case. The case already existed. All I had to do was assemble it. The next morning, before sunrise, I drove across Savannah. The streets were quiet, washed in faint gray. I parked outside Dr. Hale's office. He was already awake, lights on, kettle steaming behind the window. When he opened the door, he didn't ask why I was there. He simply stepped aside. His office smelled of cedar and old books, one of those places where truth arrived without theatrics. I placed my notes on the table. He read them silently, glasses sliding down his nose, turning each page slowly, as if measuring the weight rather than the words. When he finished, he leaned back. "They're moving without you." I nodded. "And you're done asking to be seen." I nodded again. He tapped the edge of my timeline. "You don't need revenge, you need structure." That afternoon, he called Miss Rowan. She arrived with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm and the sort of calm that comes from decades of navigating systems people underestimate. She scanned each page with quick precision, her lips tightening only when she reached the numbers Lena had drafted.
"They're planning a transfer," she said, "but they don't understand what they're transferring." "Explain it," I told her. She pointed at the licenses first. "This is the real spine. Without it, the facilities are just buildings." Then she tapped the compliance protocols I'd written. "This is intellectual property. You created it." Finally, she held up the summary of our partnerships. "This is institutional capital. It follows the system, not the name." I sat perfectly still. "You can protect your work," she continued, "not with emotion, with boundaries." We spent the next week constructing a legal framework, a nonprofit foundation built to hold everything intangible: the brand, the protocols, the data system, the partnerships. Not to own, but to safeguard. A structure that served not a family image, but the people in our care. Harbor Bridge Foundation. I chose the name quietly, a bridge built for those who needed steadiness. Under my authority as power of attorney, still fully valid, never rescinded, I executed each transfer with the precision of someone double-checking medication doses. Every document signed, notarized, filed. My parents, assuming it was routine administrative cleanup for their health and the business's stability, signed their honorary advisory roles without reading the fine print. No ownership, no control, just recognition for their name. When the work was done, I returned to operations as if nothing had changed. I moved through the hallways, checked logs, adjusted schedules. Staff greeted me with the quiet respect of people who remembered who had kept them afloat. Lena drifted through rooms with a notebook and a soft smile, offering color palette ideas for the website. My parents lit up every time she spoke. The night before the legacy celebration, I sat alone in the small office tucked behind the nurse station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My tablet was open to one last document, a letter addressed to Lena. It wasn't angry or sharp. It wasn't an accusation. It was clarity. I wrote about what she was inheriting: a shell without the system, responsibility without preparation, a title without the backbone beneath it. I explained the foundation, not to shame her, but to prepare her for the truth my parents refused to see.
I ended with one line that felt like stepping out of a shadow. What you carry next depends on what you choose to hold. I printed the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into a red envelope, a color that drew attention without making noise. On the day of the celebration, I placed the envelope in my bag beside the keys and the POA document. 3 objects, 3 truths. This time, I wouldn't fix what they'd broken. This time, I would let the system speak for itself. The celebration looked warm from the doorway. Soft lights, crystal glasses, linen napkins folded like small, careful wishes. My parents stood near the head of the table, glowing in a way they hadn't in years. Lena sat between them, posture perfect, fingers grazing the stem of her glass as if she'd rehearsed for this moment. When my father tapped his spoon against a plate, the room quieted. His voice carried easily across the table. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We honor the future of our family's work." He turned to Lena with a proud tilt of his chin. "She's ready to lead." My mother nodded, lips curved into the soft smile she saved for moments she believed were historic. "She deserves it," she added. The words didn't sting. They simply confirmed what I already knew. I waited until the applause faded. Then I stood, not abruptly, not with force, just enough for chairs to stop shifting and conversations to fall silent. I placed 3 items on the table in front of me: the keys, the power of attorney document, and the red envelope.
The keys made the smallest sound, a sharp metallic tap that cut through the room's warmth. My father frowned. "Kara, this isn't necessary." I slid them gently toward Lena. "It's all yours." Some guests smiled, mistaking it for grace. Others exchanged quiet glances, sensing the wrong kind of stillness in the air. Lena reached for the envelope first. Her fingers traced its edge before she slipped it open and unfolded the letter. Her eyes skimmed the first lines, then sharpened. She flipped to the next page, then the next. Her breath caught. "What is this?" she whispered. No one answered. She read further, her hands tightening around the paper, knuckles bleaching white. "No, this can't be right." Her voice rose, thin and disbelieving. "You're joking." Her chair screeched backward as she stood. The whole room jolted with her. My father grabbed the papers from her hand. His face drained as he reached the section outlining the transfers, brand protocols, operational rights, the licensing agreements, all placed under Harbor Bridge Foundation. His fingers trembled. "Kara, what did you do?" I didn't respond. My mother snatched a page, scanning it in quick, frantic bursts. This says we don't own any of this." "The facilities are buildings," I said quietly. "Just buildings." A hush fell. Even the silverware stopped clinking. In the far corner, Mr. Hayes, Harbor Bridge's attorney, rose from his chair. He had blended into the room until the moment he was needed. His voice was calm, almost polite. "Everything in that packet is accurate. The transfers were executed 3 years ago, during the period when Miss Hart held full legal authority to act on behalf of her parents." My father's voice cracked. "Without our consent?" "With your signatures," Hayes replied gently. "You both approved the documents at that time. We have medical verification and third-party oversight confirming the necessity." Lena looked from him to me, eyes wide, breath uneven. "So, what did they just give me?" Hayes folded his hands. 2 aging properties and the debt tied to them. Anything more would require certification from Harbor Bridge. Certification is contingent upon meeting the care standards Miss Hart designed. My mother shook her head. "She can meet them. She can learn." Hayes lifted a single page. "If staffing ratios drop, if safety protocols lapse, if any core process deviates by more than a small percentage, Harbor can revoke the license within 60 days. Without a license, the buildings cannot operate." My father's voice sank to a whisper. "So, we have nothing." I didn't correct him. They had exactly what they valued, appearance without structure. Lena sank back into her seat, the letter limp in her hands. The confident posture she'd carried all evening dissolved, her shoulders folding inward. I thought I was taking over something real." I finally spoke. "You were. The system, the responsibility, the work. You just never saw it." Hayes closed the folder. "This arrangement protects the seniors, protects the staff. It is not punitive. It is structural." My parents stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as the daughter who had carried them, but as the person who no longer would. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stepped back from the table, the room's silence following me out the door. The system would steep from here. I didn't sleep that night, not from guilt. There was nothing to feel guilty about, but because the house felt strangely quiet without the weight of expectation pressing against the walls. My phone stayed dark on the nightstand, no alerts from staff, no late medication calls, no inspection reminders. The silence felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room I hadn't realized existed. By morning, the consequences had already begun to unfold. I watched them from a distance, not because I avoided them, but because I no longer belonged inside their orbit. The bank emails, the staff resignations, the compliance notices, none of it came to me. Everything went exactly where the responsibility had been placed. Still, I drove to the new Harbor Bridge Center before sunrise. The windows glowed with soft amber, reflecting the first light rising over the river. Inside, volunteers were setting up morning activities, their voices low and steady. Someone tuned a piano in the recreation room, the gentle notes drifting through the hallway like a reminder that life continued even when families didn't. I walked into my office. The room was small, almost plain, but the morning light softened everything: the edges of the desk, the muted colors on the wall, the stack of folders I'd left the night before. I set down my keys and exhaled slowly, the breath settling into the room like a final weight released. Later that week, I saw my parents in a Medicaid waiting room. They sat together, hands clasped, staring straight ahead. They didn't see me walk by. I didn't pause, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to fix. A month later, during a site visit, I noticed Lena in one of the Allied facilities pushing a resident's wheelchair. Her movements were small and careful. She looked different without the spotlight. She didn't notice me. I let her have the moment. Some stories end with victory. Mine ended with space. Clean, quiet, earned. For the first time, I wasn't carrying anything that wasn't mine. In the end, nothing dramatic followed. No shouting, no slammed doors, no final reckoning, just a clean line drawn in quiet. Families fracture loudly, but boundaries settle like dust, soft, inevitable, impossible to sweep away once you stop pretending you're the one holding everything up. Freedom didn't come from winning. It came from stepping aside without looking back. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing at all, and sometimes the silence that follows is the only truth that ever mattered. If this story stayed with you, stay close. More are coming.